Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So this coming, the truth is, of course, that this coming week is Sukkot, and this coming Parsha will be the reading for the intermediate days of Sukkot. And then, of course, at the end of Sukkot next Thursday will be Simchat Torah, a week from this Thursday. Will be a week from this Wednesday will be Simchat Torah, at which point we end the book of Deuteronomy and begin the book of Genesis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and see how far we did finish up the Zot HaBracha. We did complete that parsha. And what I'm going to do is, so we'll do Torah Tamima today, but I will also look and see what we have in terms of Bereshit and see what we have to finish off there if we have. And so we'll work on Bereshit, on the Rashi on Bereshit. But for today, we will work on Torah Tamima, continue with Torah Tamima. So there's, as you can see, an expansion on when it says the people of Sodom were wicked. The question that the rabbis are trying to answer is, what was the nature of their wickedness? How were they exact? To call someone wicked is one thing, but it's a generality, and it's not helpful. And to be specific about the nature of their wickedness, partially that if we're aware of what it was, we can try and make sure we aren't wicked in the same way. And the other thing is to discuss the consequences of that wickedness and in terms of the large picture. And that's the other thing. I mean, are we able to look at our lives not only in its narrow sense of what our immediate needs are, but what our needs are in terms of the big picture and the fact that we're here so briefly. So here we go. We've mentioned this before, and we mentioned in our previous comment, but Ra'im וחטאים, right? So wicked, right? Evil and wicked, sinful, chata'im, sinful. And of course, the sentence says, Lifnei Hashem, before God. So, Anshe Sodom, the people of Sodom, Ein lahem chelek l'olam haba. They do not have any portion in the world to come. So there's this very firm belief in traditional Judaism and traditional Jewish belief that this life that we have is just the beginnings of a life in the world to come. It says it very explicitly in Pirkei Avot that this world should be seen as an entrance chamber to the dining room. And so you prepare yourself in the entrance chamber when you come in and to get ready to go into the banquet hall later on. That's what the purpose. So this life is about a preparation. So they will not have that opportunity. They have no portion in the world to come. Olam haba. Shneimar, how do we know this? Shneimar, as it states, v'anshe Sodom ra'im v'chata'im, as it says explicitly in the text, that the people of Sodom were wicked and sinful. Ra'im ba'olam hazeh. So, of course, the fact that we have this duplication, it doesn't just say ra'im. I mean, in terms of its simple meaning, one of those words would have been sufficient. We don't need both of them. So that we're going to say that the Torah has an additional intention by using both words. So, Ra'im ba'olam hazeh, they were wicked in this world, v'chata'im le'olam haba, and sinful in the world to come. And that, of course, doesn't seem to suffice to explain what we just said or why we just said. So, Torah Tamima is going to help us understand this. So let's take a look and find the place where he says this. Here we go. So he explains the lashon ra v'chet. He says that the expression of wicked and sinful, lifamim, there are times when these words, hem lashon onesh, that they aren't necessarily describing behavior, but are rather, in fact, an expression of punishment. And of course, not having a portion in the world to come is a punishment. So sometimes these words, and he's going to give examples, he's not going to just leave it at that. He is going to support what he's saying. Kamo. So we have, for example, and this is in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, it says, Uvayom Ra'ah, right? He says, on a day of evil, Ra'eh, examine. And the idea of that, when you talk about an evil day, it means a day in which you are having to encounter adversity. So, in that sense, adversity can be seen as a punishment, right, for something that one did that was wicked. So, in that context, this Yom Ra'ah, where this word Ra'ah, just like Ra here, right, has to do with the experience of adversity. So, that takes care of Ra'ah. Ra'ah. Ukamo, and example, Vahayiti ani uvani Shlomo. This is Bathsheba, who is talking. This is in this chapter where one of David's children tries to assume the kingship, and David had made a commitment that Solomon would be his successor, and so there's a whole story there about how Solomon and Bathsheba were not invited to this feast where this son was going to, in this sense, act like a king. And she says to King David, Ani uveni Shlomo, I and my son Solomon, Chataim, where it says will sin, but here it means essentially will be punished, will be basically killed in this case. Right? That's a Kings 1, chapter 1. Umekevan dekativ ra'im v'chata'im lashem, and since it's written as ra'im v'chata'im, these terms lashem to God, hakavana, the intention is shehem ne'entamshim bidei shamayim. The idea is that, in other words, the way we're understanding this is however you want to use this word ra'im v'chata'im, that lashem means that they will be punished. Ne'anashim bidei shamayim, that this is a divine punishment. That whatever Ra and Chat is going to mean here, it's going to mean it's at the hands of heaven. V'hainu, and that is to say, shanefesh ne'ensha b'olam haba. This is the implication that the soul will be punished in the next world. Ve'ien ma shekatuv la'el, and look at what is written above, Sof Bereshit, at the end of the Parsha of Bereshit of Genesis, pasuk where it says Lo yadon ruchi ba'adam, where it says my spirit will no longer, I guess we might say, will be tolerated in man. This, of course, we know that towards the end of the chapter of Genesis, the Parsha of Genesis, is where things are getting ready for the flood, where God is deciding to flood the world and destroy humanity, right? So, and there we read about how that was to be understood. Parshat Noah, without going back to that particular statement, these are also statements that deal with the Olam Haba issue. Parshat Noach, and then in the Parsha of Noach itself, Pasuk Vayimach et kol hayakum, where it says all of existence perished. It was wiped out, blotted out. Right, Masha Katuv, what is written be'inyan drashot ka'ela, where these kinds of interpretations are written in connection with those particular statements in the end of the end of the section of Genesis, the reading of Genesis and the beginning of Parsha Noach, right, of Noah. So, this is something that, as you know, is just generally ignored in terms of modern interpretations of Judaism. And because we don't want to look at the world in that particular way, we tend to take this just extreme empirical understanding of reality. But it's very much part of traditional Judaism. And at least it's something to think about. Ra'im v'chata'im. And again, we're going to look at this again and try to understand exactly what's going on here. Amar Rav Yehuda, said Rav Yehuda, Ra'im begufam, they were evil in their bodies, right? In other words, they use their bodies for evil purposes. Kidichtiv, as it says, and this is Parshat Vayeshev. This is to do with the story of Joseph towards the end of the book of Genesis. This is where he is talking to Potiphar's wife when she is trying to seduce him. And he says, Ve'ech e'eseh hara'ah. And there's that word ra'ah, right? That's how we got ra'im in this context and ra'ah in this context. How can I do such an evil, hagdolah, such a great evil, hazot, this, in other words, to sleep with you, v'chatati lelohim. Look at this. And it says, and I will chata to God, right? How can I do such a thing? So since it involves the actual commitment of adultery, that's the gufam with their bodies. V'chata'im b'mahonam, but they also sinned regarding their possessions, their money. Dichtiv, v'haya b'cha, and this is in Parshat Tetzei in the book of Deuteronomy, where the context has to do with, you'll see, Torah Tamima will explain that a little bit further, and there will be a sin. It'll be considered as if you have sinned, or you will have sinned. And there it has to do with money, and we'll take a look. We'll have a better idea of that. So, okay, so the first part we can understand. That was straightforward because of what the context of that story with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. But in the context of Kiteitzei, Be'inyan ichur tashlumei neder, there it has to do where if you make a vow to promise something in terms of money, of making a donation, and you delay on that. And not only that, there's where if you delay payment of a vow, the kovesh schar sachir, and likewise, if you delay in terms of paying a hireling, someone you've hired, ire, there it deals, ire means it's dealing with the context of it. It's dealing with either delaying the payment of a vow, the fulfillment of a vow, or paying the salary, the earnings of someone who you've hired. And there it talks about the word chet. And since that has to do with money issues, that's how we're understanding it here as well. So, next. B'matnita tani. So this is a continuation of this particular parsha. B'matnitan, I believe that what we're talking about is we're saying that in a baraita, in other words, in a source that's an early source that's of Mishnaic origin of that time. Ra'im b'mamonam, there they understand Ra'im regarding money. In other words, here we said Ra'im was their bodies, but here we reverse it. It's reversed. Kedichtiv, how do we know that it has to do with, that Ra'im has to do with their money matters? Kedichtiv, as it states, and this is in Parshat Re'eh, this is also in the book of Deuteronomy. V'ra'ah einecha, so there's that word, ra'ah, and your eye, in other words, you look wickedly, ba'achicha evyon, regarding your brother who is impoverished, meaning not supporting them, right? Not giving them sufficient money to help support them. And there it talks about if you act towards that, and there it uses the word v'ra'ah. So that's the why they are in this baraita, they consider Ra'im has to do with their money, that they were wicked in terms of their money, B'chata'im, and sinful begufam with regard to their bodies, Kedichtiv, and that we've already a little familiar with because we've got that reference to Joseph talking to Potiphar's wife, and he uses the word v'chatati lelohim, and he says, and I will sin before God, referring, of course, to sleeping with Potiphar's wife. So they have, it's interesting, just that in the one, it has to do with their money, and there it just is reversed. There's an opinion that reverses the understanding of what Ra'im and Chata'im is referring to. Let's take a look at this. Piresh Besefer Iyun Yaakov, right? So it's explained in a book called Iyun Yaakov. The Rav Yehuda, so remember the first person whom we quoted was Rav Yehuda. Right? So let's see, right? Umatnita pligibaha. What's their basis? Why do they disagree? On what basis do they disagree? Why do they reverse their meaning? Right? So there's a deeper meaning to why they associate one with the one word and the other with the other word, and they have a reverse of how they associate those words. The ola olam, right? That in the final analysis, Sefer Dekra, the end of this scriptural verse, Lo sif chet yoter gadol ka'ate. In other words, the reason why our verse is saying chataim, ra'im v'chataim, right? Why it's saying ra'im, why it uses both words, is that the second word chataim is to put added emphasis. In other words, to say not only were they wicked, they were worse than wicked, they were chataim. So that this word chataim is there to increase the level of wickedness, to emphasize the fact of just how wicked they were. So this is one level of wickedness, and this is a greater level of wickedness. That's what he's saying, right? They both understand this verse that those words are being used in that way, and that the second word is trying to say that it was even worse than the one. Uledat Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda is of the opinion, chataim b'mamonam, that to be sinful with regard to their money, yoter garua, that's worse. That's why he says chataim refers to their money. That's what he said, right? Shehu ra l'shamayim. Why? Because when you cheat a person, right, you're not only ra l'shamayim, you're not only wicked in God's eyes, for ra l'vriyot, but you're also wicked to the person you're committing this against. So that's why Rav Yehuda considers that worse, right, than with their bodies. Tana de Baraita, Bar Savar, but the teacher of the Baraita, right, the Matnita Tana, Savar, he holds, de Mamon Yeshno Bahashava, that money is not quite so bad, because you can, in fact, if you steal from someone or something like that, at least you can make up for it. There's compensation that can be made when you wrong someone on a money basis. Masha enochen, which you cannot do, chataim begufam, that when you commit a sin with your body, there's no way to compensate a person for what you've done. I mean, you can give them some kind of compensation, but with money, you can completely compensate them. With their bodies, you can't. For garua yoter, and so consequently, that's worse. So that's how they look at it. You can argue it both ways. Onwards. Ra'im v'chataim, again, we're really riffing on this, right? What exactly was it? Ra'im elu la'ela, they were wicked one to the other, v'chataim, and they were sinful, b'gilui arayot, and there they committed sins. B'gilui arayot literally means, in terms of sexual behavior, right? In promiscuity. So and essentially, Gilu Arayot has to do initially in terms of how Leviticus describes this. It has to do with incest, things like that. But it does, essentially, literally it means the revealing of nakedness. So that's what the term actually means literally. Let's take a look here. Ulai Darish Kate. It's possible that the reason why they're interpreting it in this way, Mishum de inyan kiruv lazeh, right? That regarding getting close, being intimate, right? Lazeh. Kativ, it says, Lo tachti et haaretz. It says regarding this, you shall not cause the land to sin. right? In Parshat Ki Tetzei, there it talks about behavior like that and says, and cause the land to sin in the land of Israel if you behave this way, right? And ukamo v'chatati leElohim gabe Yosef, and likewise with regards to I shall sin before the Lord in the context of Joseph that we've mentioned a number of times. So it's just one thing. So Ra'im Elu La'elu has there to do with improper behavior on a human level, right? So just generally to not act properly, that it has a profound effect is what I believe the Torah is trying to tell us in this kind of behavior. And because it's so common, and we read about it even these days, it's terrible, right? Lashem ma'od, right? To the Lord very much, literally. Amar Rav Yehuda. So again, we've got Rav Yehuda, who was, we quoted before, right? Lashem, when it comes to saying before God, Zo Birkat Hashem. So he breaks it down even more. Zo Birkat Hashem means cursing God. We don't want to use bracha, we know means blessing. And it's an example of euphemism, Hebrew euphemism. But Birkat Hashem is a reference to cursing God. Ma'od, very much, right? Shemitkav mitkavnim v'chotim, that they are doing it intentionally, that it isn't just that treating God with such disrespect isn't something out of ignorance, but they intentionally do it. They do it with a desire to insult the divine. Excuse me. Okay, let's take a look here. Ritzono lomar. So what does he want? What's he trying to tell us? Chotim lahachis, that when they were sinning, they were doing it, in fact, just to create anger. In other words, they were doing it with an intention to just out of spite. That's what it's meaning, right? Ukemoshe katuv b'Sanhedrin, and it's similar to what is referenced in Sanhedrin, the tractate Sanhedrin, page 103b. She'amar Amun. This was one of the kings of Israel, I believe, or Judah, one of those kings, who says, Klum ani oseh, in fact, am I doing this? The reason and he was one of the wicked kings, am I doing this, ela lahachis et bor'i, am I doing this except to anger my creator? So just completely intentional going on. Let's see. Okay. B'matnita Tane. And again, we have a Baraita. So we've had an example before of Rav Yehuda and some unnamed Tana, right? Rav Yehuda is an Amora, which is interesting. Matnita, I believe, is an earlier source. Lashem. Okay, so again, Zul Birkat Hashem. So there's that he agrees. Lashem, right? They agree. Birkat Hashem means cursing. Ma'od, what about very much? Zo Shvichut Damim. This is a reference to bloodshed. Bloodshed. Again, look at what's going on with these killings, etc., going on. Shinemar, as it states, and this is Kings 2, chapter 21. Gam Dam Naki Shafach Menashe. Again, one of the kings, he was a king of Judah, right? He was actually king for quite a long time. And it says, Dam Naki Shafach Menashe, that Menashe spilled much blood, innocent blood, that he killed innocent people. Harbe Ma'od, and it goes on to say in that verse, Harbe Ma'od, and there's that word Ma'od, a great deal. In other words, he created a great deal of bloodshed. And that's in Sanhedrin, page 109a. Let's find it here. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. He simply makes a reference. He says, look, look at what's written above, Ot Yalef in his footnote 11, Ve'efshar letzaref hadvarim lakan, and one can also apply
Mhm.
those particular issues here. Did you have a question or comment? So again, what this has to do, the idea ma'od of being on a greater level. So it's interesting. Uh, so just this again, their attitude about one thing being done against God and one thing being done against a human being, right? That if it's done against a human being, you can you're then sinning both against a human being and against God as well, right? Um, so interesting though, looking to see, right, whether or not this is Rabbi Yehuda, whether he considers the reason why that is, to be intentionally sinning, and why the Matnita considers shviut. I mean, in both cases, they have to do with one against God and the other against another human being. And take one more. Lashem Ma'od, right, to God very greatly. Anshe Sodom ein lahem chelek l'olam haba. So again, we've had this notion before that the people of Sodom have no share, no portion in the world to come. Shne'emar va'anshe Sodom ra'im v'chata'im l'Hashem, because it states in the verse that the people of Sodom were wicked and evil before Lord ma'od, very much. Ra'im v'chata'im ba'olam hazeh. So this it divides it up just a little bit differently, right? In the one case, they said, Ra'im was olam hazeh and Chata'im le'olam haba. But here they take both this, that they were both wicked and sinful in this world, Lashem ma'od, to the Lord very much, La'atid lavo, meaning in future time, for the coming future. Let's take a look at, to see what Torah Tamima has to say about that. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is interesting. We have a little bit to go here. Let me make sure I've got the right place here. Uh, okay, that's Tet Vav. So he has a brief statement here. Yen Masha Katuv La'el Ot Tet. He says, look at what's written above with regards to his footnote number 9. And I think we're going to stop here for today. So I'm going to stop the share. See if you have any thoughts about what we were reading. Judith, Kathy, any thoughts before I stop the recording? Okay. Just very sad stuff. It really is. And it's interesting how, in some ways, it's a commentary on our time when you think about it. That in both regards to the bloodshed and how maybe they're connected to each other, right? The promiscuity, right? The promiscuity and the bloodshed possibly imply a certain lack of respect and appreciation of our lives as human beings. Just a thought.